we can go ahead and get started and kick it off. I know more folks will be joining us as we go along. So welcome, my name is Jessie Norriss, and I am the Director of Technology for the Environmental Policy Innovation Center. For those that don't know us, we focus on building policies that deliver dramatic improvements to the speed and scale of environmental progress. And today we're really excited to talk about the opportunities with the new federal infrastructure funding, and specifically how technology and digital infrastructure can play a role in expediting the impacts of projects and doing that in a more equitable way as well. I'm excited to be joined by Shay Faebody, the co-founder of Varuna Technology, Luis Montestruque, who is a senior advisor with Xylem, and Brenna Garcia, who leads program management at Temboo, as well as our executive director, Tim Mail. Just some general housekeeping. We welcome your comments and questions throughout, so feel free to use the chat box or raise your hand. We kept this as panelists or participants also being able to talk to keep it a little bit more informal in the conversation and tone. And so I'm going to start off and hand the mic over to Tim Mail to do some introductory framing and why we're reuniting here today. And then we'll pass it to the panelists and have a handful of questions to walk through. So over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Jessie, and thanks to all our panelists as well. My name is Tim Mail. I'm the executive director of EPIC, and we do work on the policy side of water infrastructure. And of course, this is a really exciting moment to be working on water infrastructure in general and policy behind it at both the federal and state level. Just a little context setting. Of course, as many of you know, water utilities and advocates across the country have talked about, something like a $2 trillion backlog or need in the space of water infrastructure, this, very vast number. Now, all of a sudden, as a result of the infrastructure law, some funding at the state level as well for things like lead pipe replacement in targeted states, and then potentially the Build Back Better Act that may pass this month or next year. There's a lot more money to spend in a sort of 5-year period of time than we probably imagined we could ever be successful at. Right? I've been part of so many advocacy efforts where everybody's like, well, this is the number we need, but it's always a really ambitious goal. Suddenly we have a phenomenal amount of money to spend. But of course, one of the other parts of this conversation has been about how do we spend that money better? How do we help utilities that have been struggling for decades to keep up with their treatment and water management needs, affordability? How do we help them build something that is more sustainable in the future? How do we deal with both emerging contaminants, which have some new funding, but also well-known contaminants like lead, and really use that money to solve a problem that is a problem that utilities recognize, but also problems that consumers recognize. And we've focused a lot in our work on the issue of trust in water systems, and are really cognizant of public surveys that have shown the number of Americans who aren't drinking their tap water increasing, even though the vast majority still do and trust water and water utilities. We have to figure out how to make sure that everyone knows that their water is safe if it is, that if it's not safe, that they don't drink it, and then that they're advocates for getting better water services. So in the space of better, we see an enormous potential for technologies, including some of the great stuff that Luis and Briana and Shay will talk about today, for those technologies to play a big role in better water services, affordable water services, better climate outcomes, and more sustainable utilities in the long run that provide services that are affordable to all their people. And so we both want to keep lifting up examples of fantastic technology that's already being deployed or is just about to be deployed. We also want to make sure programs like the state revolving loan funds, like the new lead pipe removal financing that's available through the SRF, but potentially other programs, the technical assistance provisions of federal funding and other sources of funding are as accessible as they can be for technology solutions, as well as green infrastructure solutions, as well as traditional gray infrastructure solutions. So that's really the core purpose of this panel. And we just see these three individuals and of course the companies and efforts you all represent as a great set of people to talk about, to have a dialogue about like, what's the real potential of this funding in this moment in our country, how do we get it right when it comes to building back better with technology playing a big role in water services. So that's my introduction to this panel, and we'll be jumping into questions after letting Briana and Luis and Shay do introductions. So why don't we go in that order, and then we'll jump into Q&A.
Sounds great. Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you for having us in this discussion. We're excited to be part of it. So my name is Brenna Garcia, and I'm on the product management team here at Temboo. And Temboo essentially is a no-code community platform for environmental engagement. So we bring together technology, people, and environmental data into a single place where we can measure, understand, and create actionable insights based around water quality, air quality, and investments in green infrastructure. So really, we're focusing on environmental engagement, where we enable anybody, regardless of their experience with remote connected devices or networks or software, really be able to do 4 things. Number 1 is contribute to the way environmental data is collected. So we have environmental sensors taking in real-time information, and we're detailing these changes, in this case, water quality, but now we're making it more inclusive. For example, we're allowing citizens who are taking their dogs for a walk and see an algae bloom to take a photo and to upload it where we have that sensor data. So really we have a marriage of this quantifiable sensor data and this qualitative information from a person who lives and works in this community. And really what that does is it allows us to understand the story of what's actually happening. And this is particularly important for cities who need more than just the data, right? They need to know if it's a non-point source pollution or is there an illegal discharge happening. This helps bring that story into full view. Number 2, we make the data understandable. We are taking these data points and translating into a story that everyone can understand, because it shouldn't be difficult to understand how your water systems are changing or air quality systems, or to Tim's point earlier, investments in green infrastructure. So we're now translating this data into a format that's available for all stakeholders, be it community members looking at working with ecologists, hydrologists, and even city employees. Number 3 is we make the data accessible. We're all about sharing the information between networks, again, with community members as well, but also to cities and within city departments. And then lastly, number 4 is, making or creating a collaborative solution here. We have this data, we're able to look at it collaborative at a hyper-local level across the city or even a few neighborhoods, or again, across a network of information, and really start to understand the changing conditions and implement short-term and long-term best management practices, or looking at different investments in different areas and really have those measurable outcomes. So in essence, Temboo, we're about enabling this environmental engagement and empowering people to be part of the larger solution, because data behind lock and key only benefits a few, but through our platform, we're democratizing technology such that it is understandable, accessible, and actionable. And we have the opportunity to do this with citizens, environmental advocate networks, private industries, and cities. So we're excited, and thank you for having us. I'll pass it on.
Luis, do you want to jump in next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Luis Montestruque. Thank you very much for attending this presentation, taking some time out of your afternoon, and thank you to EPIC for having me. I'm located in South Bend, Indiana. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. I started my career in water about 17 years ago when I was finishing my grad school at the University of Notre Dame. And at that time, I was working on wireless sensor networks when a couple of professors, one from civil engineering and one from electrical engineering, approached me and asked me if we could use that technology to address a problem that at the time was one of the largest capital infrastructure projects for the city of South Bend, and that was reducing combined sewer overflows. So I started a company back then around 2004 called MNet, and we created this amazing partnership. And I want to highlight this partnership idea because it is incredibly important in this context. It was not only a multidisciplinary partnership, but it was also multi-institutional. So we had the University of Notre Dame, Purdue University. We had the city of South Bend at the center. So in 2008, we deployed what was then one of the largest wireless sensor networks for monitoring their wastewater and stormwater infrastructure and control it. And we had terrific outcomes. 50% of reduction of E. coli on the St. Joseph River, 70% of reduction in overflows, and ultimately saving the city about $500 million in capital infrastructure. And then in 2017, MNET joined Xylem and a cohort of other smaller smart water infrastructure companies. And since then, my focus has been looking at the entire urban water cycle as a whole and helping utilities manage it in a smarter way. And that covers overflows, that covers non-revenue water, treatment plan optimization, utilizing Internet of Things, and utilizing AI tools as well. All of this under a framework that we call the Real-Time Decision Support System framework, which essentially is composed of 3 parts. First, turning on the lights using Internet of Things, sensing technologies, developing a digital twin using machine learning, and then optimizing the outcomes using data analytics and optimization algorithms. So Xylem has taken this concept of real-time decision support system framework and apply it to this urban water cycle to help utilities really achieve faster outcomes at a fraction of the time and a fraction of the cost, increase the reach and affordability and the quality of water services, improve environmental outcomes, and reduce cost to the ratepayers and make their services more affordable. So that's a little bit about me and what I do. Thank you very much.
Great. And Shay?
Thank you. First off, hi everyone, and thanks to Epic for having me on the panel. As Tim mentioned, my name is Shay Faebody, CEO and co-founder at Varuna. And at Varuna, we like to say we're providing peace of mind about drinking water to everyone involved. But the way we do that is through thoughtfully designed software and hardware. We drop our devices, our IoT devices, in what we like to call blind spots within the distribution system. Not the places that are currently monitored, like the booster pump station or the storage tanks you might have in a small or mid-sized water system. We focus on those locations where they currently don't have power or communication, like the sample collection point. We drop our IoT devices there and we pull the data from our sensors. And our sensors focus on parameters, not contaminants, parameters, known parameters like chlorine, pH, temperature, turbidity, and I'll explain why we've chosen those shortly. And we create what we like to call the water health score for the technicians so that they can address any issues we identify as close to real time as possible, highlight the trends and how they might need to, in the case of one of our customers, allocate some funds to capital improvement projects so that they can, for example, put a booster pump station between the water treatment plant and the furthest points within the distribution network. And these dashboards that we pull our data into, start to help them to get a sense for the whole system, not just the places they typically monitored before, but the whole system, so that they can consistently deliver clean water. The reason why we chose chlorine is one, it was the chlorine as one of the parameters. Customers drove us to these sample location points and told us when we were prospecting, they told us if I could get data from these points in real time affordably, it will help me to address my operational issues at the treatment plant. How much should we dose? Are we truly addressing the highest priority problems for our customers? And the more we went around the country on truck rolls, we saw that beyond just data coming from these blind spots, we'd become a partner, to Luis's point earlier, a partner to these small and mid-sized cities and towns that aren't typically getting all the attention. Thankfully, most of them will get some money from the infrastructure bill now because they do have problems. But before the money showed up at the scale it's showing up now, we were providing affordable technology to enable them to deliver clean water consistently. And we hope to continue to partner with them as they now have the resources to truly do the hard work they do every day. I'm excited to answer the questions and looking forward to this.
Well, thanks, y'all. I think you touched on a lot of issues that we hope to dive into a little bit deeper. And some of the three that were coming up for us is, one, what is the role of technology to really increase public engagement in the process? And thinking a lot about community-led design or communities just knowing what's going on. The second is, I think Luis, you talked about this a bit, of workforce concerns. Are we trying to replace old workers? Are we aging people out? Or how do we, and I guess Shay, you said this as well, is there an integral part to the design and deployment of this technology? And then lastly is the role of data and technology to really improve environmental outcomes and environmental justice outcomes. And so Shay, I know you're just talking, but I want to start with you first in terms of, I think you said you actually had a story in my hometown around the role of technology to improve environmental justice outcomes. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about it.
Yes. Monroe, Louisiana, they're dear to our hearts because they truly gave us our first shot at deploying a solution in their system. And the story of driving around with Monroe, Louisiana is one we use a lot. We got in trucks with their technicians and they would take us to these points at the end, the furthest points from their distribution network, where because of the lack of visibility, and I mentioned Monroe, but this is really the case across all the towns we're working with, because of the lack of real-time visibility into the state of chlorine, pH, temperature at the endpoints of the distribution network, their biggest problem or worry, was that their customers were drinking water that, frankly, it's even talking about it now, they would have to wait for the customers to call them to say, you know what, my water tastes funny, or it's not flowing properly. And so there might be some stagnation somewhere that as we started to dig into things, we realized, you know what, chlorination, which is a method used a lot across the US, ineffective chlorination is the cause of about 16 million cases of gastroenteritis in the US alone, across some of these small and mid-sized water systems predominantly. And these technicians knew this, but they didn't have the tools to help them to quickly address the root cause of the waterborne disease issues. That's one. And then the second part of this was they were flushing, because they didn't know, they were flushing the water at these endpoints, which is really, if we're talking about not having enough source water, which is a big problem we're starting to experience, and you pull the water, treat the water, and then pump it through the system to then flush it, the wastage that was going on bothered them, but they had no other way to address the issue. So what we've done in Monroe and a bunch of other cities is provide technology that allows them to start to make the correlations between system behavior and customer outcomes, resident outcomes, but also, and I know Luis will touch on this, these technicians who have the latest gadgets in their homes, they have smart home equipment, and then they have to take sample data information on a piece of paper. It was just this dissonance that they were feeling every day that we help them ease to make them feel like they will be a part of the future of this industry, and we need them to be. So Monroe is one of those, and we've gotten a few grants because it just so happens to be that these small and mid-sized cities that we're working in overlap with majority minority residents, and we can deploy advanced technology in these communities when it probably wouldn't have happened before. And that's the environmental justice bit that excites us about the work we do every day. So.
Briana or Luis, anything else y'all want to add just in terms of the role digital tools can play in improving environmental justice outcomes, or what we need to be mindful of to better facilitate that?
Yeah, I think, you know, part of this as well is data visualization, right? There's a lot of really good data out there that exists, but it's not necessarily translated in a way that everyday folks can understand. And, you know, if we're looking at environmental data on a city website, it might be the 30th page in that website or a PDF file, and it's put on a graph for units people, you know, are unfamiliar with. So one of the low-hanging solutions is, you know, the storytelling of this information. And it's one thing that we do here at Temboo is we take that quantifiable and qualitative data and we put it in a format that is, you know, understandable for every stakeholder. You know, green means good, yellow means the water quality is worsening, red means the water quality is, you know, something that we need to look at. And so I think the data visualization is one key area. And another important factor when looking at environmental justice is making sure you have the polluters and community members and cities and tech partners, you know, together where we can actually use this information and have those measurable outcomes produce actual results. And so I think including the communities that are frontline or is subjected to pollution for decades, it's valuable to have them at the table, to have them part of the process, and to use data or technology in the water infrastructure as a tool for understanding, learning, and again, recommendations or short or long-term procedures that we can put in to improve the overall water quality system.
I completely agree. I think on the real-time decision support system framework that I've been working on, the turning on the lights is the first part, right, to provide visibility and transparency. When we're talking about things like other infrastructure like roads, it's pretty easy to see when they are breaking apart, or even when traffic lights are not operating correctly, you can see the congestion. But when you're talking about a water infrastructure, when you have all of these vast miles and miles of infrastructure that is all buried underground, then you're talking about infrastructure that is out of sight and out of mind. And so the need to invest in the infrastructure is not as obvious as it is with other things. So turning on the lights on that infrastructure is absolutely vital first step in trying to achieve that. And I'll go one step further and say, what we need is to have the utilities and the regulators partner to incentivize that turning on the lights on the infrastructure to accelerate outcomes, incentivize and not to penalize when you actually bring that kind of visibility and transparency that is needed to take this to the next step. So that's my 2 cents on that topic.
I think just staying with this for a minute, we got a question in the chat that's basically saying, how do we encourage this kind of testing when we know the technology is there without freaking out the community? And, sometimes utilities don't want to know this because if they do see it and there's transparency in the community and there's accountability, then that creates a whole nother set of pressure. So I'm curious how y'all would respond and how you've overcome that challenge. Shay, do you want to start?
Yeah, so one of there's this phrase that always jumps into my mind when we have this sort of conversations about information wanting to be free. And the old approach the industry has had towards sort of safeguarding everything from the average consumer because it might freak them out doesn't work anymore in any other industry. So we absolutely need to recognize that that will no longer work. And then there's the second part of this where I think everyone agrees, we need collective effort to address the problems we have with water. And research has shown that citizen scientists are a huge part of moving any industry forward. We've seen this across other industries. It's probably time for us to do the same. I think Tim and I have had this conversation before because we've worked with some water systems that don't want the information we're sharing with them to go out to their customers. And they start off from this unwillingness, but then gradually, when we tell them, show the people the good work you're doing. This isn't just about showing them, oh, things are bad. Show them the good work you're doing so that they can value your work and the water. Acceptance increases for any needs you have of your consumers. And consequently, in cases where you might have to increase rates, or for example, they've been with you on the journey of understanding how much work you actually do as a water system, and they will be more accepting of some of these requests you will have for them. So it's a conversation we have constantly, and I'd love to hear Briana's comments actually, because you do this every day as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I know for us, in one of our particular environmental justice projects in Cleveland, Ohio, we do have the industry at the table with us. We do have citizens who are quite frankly angry at the decades of pollution that they have succumbed to and are quite literally will be paying with their overall quality of life and life expectancy and the city and us. And the way that we overcome this challenge is really in understanding how we're going to use this data, right? It is a delicate conversation. The information we acquire, again, from the sensors, from the network, turning on those lights, but also the community being part of the process and therefore solution, one creates a culture of inclusivity, but also one where we can use these insights for good, if you will, not necessarily to combat the polluter or industry, because they still are providing local jobs and industry to this community. But there's a way that we can work more in concert with each other that benefits the communities that do live next to these industries. So I think it's a delicate conversation, but one that is very necessary. And so that's where our partners really work with us on that storytelling and using the information as a tool for learning, not necessarily as a combative tool. And to that degree, that does feed into EPA larger environmental justice grants, and hopefully this infrastructure bill, as there is a subset set aside for issues such as this.
Yeah, we have found a lot of utilities that have the courage, right, to actually do something that Shay, you mentioned, and that is value the work that they are doing and being able to show that to the rest of the community. It does take courage to turn on the lights and see what is actually happening underground. but it is absolutely necessary for those utilities that have the courage to do that. They are able to start taking credit for the work that they do, right, and start improving their actual situation. And through those tools, being able to demonstrate both to the public and to the regulators how they are actually using the money that they collect, the revenues that they collect, and the money that they get from other sources. Not just, in many cases, not just to improve the quality of the water services, but also to improve the overall well-being of the citizens in many of these communities. So, absolutely important.
Luis, you want to expand a little bit more about how y'all did that in South Bend, Indiana, and what that looked like in the gray-green infrastructure combination?
Yeah, absolutely. When we started this journey in South Bend, the consent decree had just been signed to move forward with a project that would involve almost exclusively gray infrastructure to solve what was then a $1 billion program to reduce combined sewer overflows from the St. Joseph River. When we finally were able to deploy all of these sensor networks on the ground, we were able to see that number one, the situation was not as dire in many places, and perhaps it was worse in other places than what had been originally expected. But through this actual journey of turning on the lights, creating transparency, creating accountability, the city was able to dramatically improve how is it that they were operating the sewer system. So at that point in time, they literally had two guys that would be going around the city on a pickup truck and lifting out manholes and shining down a flashlight to see if any of the overflow points was actually active at that point in time. And they would spend, close to 2 weeks actually doing that on a round robin. And if they found something, then they needed to report it, and that came in with all sorts of different liabilities. So when we deployed the wireless sensor network, the city was all of a sudden being able to see how all the infrastructure was operating in real time. And that meant that those two guys that before were just going around and trying to see in the dark if there was an overflow or not, they became data scientists. So instead of planning their day around which site they were going to visit, they would actually look at a dashboard and they would say, this place doesn't look right. We should actually go in and try to see what is actually happening there. Through that process, then the city was able to gather information and be able to control how the sewer system works, sort of like a smart traffic light system, and be able to realize, guys, the program that we had before that was all gray infrastructure not only is very expensive, not only is not going to solve our overflow problem, but it's actually not going to improve the lives of any of the citizens that live in this city. Right? No one is going to go and take their kids to a deep tunnel, right? Or to a disinfection facility. That's not fun. That's actually pretty dangerous. So we devised the ability to take this digital twin that we had built with all of this data, with all of this knowledge of how the system was operating, and try virtually every combination of green, gray, and smart infrastructure for the city, and came up with hundreds of thousands of different scenarios that could achieve the outcome, the environmental outcome that they required by the regulators. And we were able to fold into this a lot of, with the free capital that now we had, a lot of green infrastructure that was now best geared to improving the lives of some of the economically challenged locations in the city. South Bend is, and let me point this thing out, South Bend is by no means a Silicon Valley or anything like that, right? We're in the middle, we're in Rust Belt City. 30% are below the poverty line. It's not necessarily viewed, at least at that point in time, as a sophisticated, wealthy city. And what we were able to do was, in this tight partnership with the public that was able to see what the city was doing with the actual city, and with us, actually transform the outcome that they had. And we had a terrific, earlier this year, a new consent decree that lowered that initial capital investment that was required from $1 billion down to less than $500 million. So half of the price, and or half of the costs, and faster environmental outcome. So that was really, really good.
Yeah. I'm curious just to understand a little bit just the timing of that process, right? Like, so you started in 2004 in one city. You've been doing this for over a decade now. What can we learn from that process, and how easy is that to be replicated in other places if a community is engaged and interested and knows that they have this challenge? If we're thinking about spending, quickly, or designing new projects, or otherwise.
Well, one thing that we learned pretty quickly is that every utility and every community is different. The objectives that the city of South Bend, that is Rust Belt, inland, fairly flat city, are very different from one that is, an East Coast or a West Coast city that have a completely different set of problems. However, since we started, we have been able to engage close to 40 or 50 different utilities, not only in the US, but abroad as well, that have similar problems. And the overall thing that we learn through this is that this idea of a deep partnership with a utility, where what we are really doing is we are taking all of the knowledge of the operators, the people that have been working on these systems for decades, and distill that to tools that then can make that work easier, can be easier managed, and easily operated by younger generations that, as Shay and Briana mentioned, are more used to modern tools. So processes like this can take as little as a year to actually go and execute. But it really depends, right? There are utilities that are different stages of how they manage their water infrastructure. But what I'm really hoping to see, and I tip my hat to you and to Tim, is how does this conjuncture of events with the infrastructure bill can actually accelerate this process. The technology is not the problem, right? The technology is not the problem. We have the technology. You have here a fantastic group of people that are bringing excellent technologies. But the question is, what needs to happen with the regulators, with state and federal government, to be able to help us take this technology and apply it so that we can get to those triple bottom line outcomes faster.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said that better than we did, but one of the things that Tim and I have been circling around a lot is supply is not the issue in terms of technology and innovation. It's demand, and particularly government demand, of either saying, we're not going to entertain this given our current regulatory landscape, or there's a lot more we could dive into there, but I think we can talk about it further. And I guess the last question that we had, maybe for you, Briana, I know we've talked about this a lot in terms of increasing public engagement and public trust in drinking water in particular. For example, we know that I think all lead pipes were removed in Flint, but a lot of residents still don't drink their water, and that could be seen as a failed case. How do we prevent that in the future? You've talked a bit about bringing community along in the process, but is there anything else that that you'd want to mention there?
Yeah, yes, we definitely want to bring the community along with us in the process. You know, as mentioned earlier, the world of not having data accessible for whatever reason is no longer the case. People want to know what's happening. People are concerned. There is more information out there. So being part of the process from the beginning is really important, but also what we do with this information. Like, what is the result of this data that we produce with, you know, say soil and water conservation districts that are looking to reduce flooding or improve water quality, right? If the community is part of this work, right, they're engaged and they're seeing this soil and water conservation district working actively to improve the water systems, and then having them actually implement, again, best management practices that do have a positive outcome. That is one way where the community can see that their actions are going towards a benefit that directly impacts them and their lives. So I guess really that partnership is really important, right? I know we've talked a lot about it, having the right people at the table and including them in the process, but not just one part of the process, the entire process. And I think that is the real impact and change that we can have, and then, you know, making that scalable, not just in one particular community, but across the city and across several cities. So people can see how their work is benefiting their own homes, but also what other folks are doing too. And I think that empowerment's important. So I think that, yeah, the partnerships is essential here in those outcomes.
So just looking at the clock, I think we had our last question right, which is, you know, what is your top line advice to EPA state regulators? I do have 2 additional questions from the chat that I wanted to get to as well, but let's start with that. Just top line advice to EPA or state regulators that opens the door to technology, or how that can make your lives easier and the lives of communities that could benefit from that technology. Shay, do you want to start?
Yes, I had I think I was trying to think of a infrastructure bill joke, but I still don't have one. The big one for me, and I believe I've mentioned this before, is just this need for us, and I said this on, I think it was on our call last week, not to just do things as we've always done it. The monies that coming down, I guess it's clearly been allocated to some goals. That's sort of the broad idea here. But that suggests that we're going to do things, we're just going to fix the things that are broken, not do things in a new way. And I know that's not what it means, but we do have the opportunity to fundamentally think about our water systems anew here. I've got an 8-year-old, and he knows what we do. And one day we were just talking, and he ended up here, which has now become a line I use. And he's like, why do we use the same water we drink to flush our toilets? He was like
he gets it.
He gets it.
Yeah.
He gets it. And it's because we tell him not to waste water, and he's wondering, but
Yeah.
Point being, how can we at the top level start to think that way? Like the future that we're trying to secure the water resources we have for, they've started to think this way. We need to be the ones to catch up and fundamentally rethink our water systems with the money we now have available to us. And I know it's this lofty, but it really is the only way that we can make sure we're not just wasting the money, in my opinion, anyway. So, yeah.
Luis?
So I want to take Shay's comment as a starting point. I've always thought of before getting into the water industry as one-way flows, right? So you get drinking water, and that's one thing, and wastewater is something magical. You know, goes down the drain and then it goes somewhere away. But as soon as I got looking more into it, I realized this is all one cycle, right? So a city or a community is like a machine, and the water goes in a circle around this machine as a cycle. So starting to think, like Shay is saying, in a different way about our water infrastructure, as a smart water infrastructure is definitely where we need to go, right? And in that process, and the EPA has already came up with these terms. Adaptive management and integrated planning are two frameworks that need to be much more present these days than they were before. And like Tim is mentioning in the chat, we need to figure out the way that we incentivize utilities to adopt this kind of technologies, for the sake of making sure that that the funding that is being provided is truly used to build better systems and in a most optimal way, right? So digital infrastructure is absolutely a component of this. It's not all, but we've got the Lego tool set. We just need to build a thing, right? So that's my point of view.
Yeah, I completely agree, right? It's one living water system, supply and demand. And if we have utilities having that incentive to implement these technologies, we could actually get a real-time pulse and better manage our water systems in a way that, to your point, is sustainable, but also, sustainable for generations to come. We know the issues. I think we also know the solutions, and a big hurdle is funding and getting it down to the level that we can actually show these measurable outcomes, and make adjustments as necessary. And I know, for us, one of the ways that can make our lives easier is more or less looking at like a sliding data standard to some degree. We do work with, in both directly with cities and indirectly with cities as well, to get water quality data. And, sometimes it's yes or no based on the hardware that we have collecting this information. And I think we need to maintain high water level standards, but also I think there should be somewhat of a sliding scale where if we do have a really robust water quality sensor that is from Xylem used at wastewater treatment plants, that data also be accepted for the EPA and understanding and improving our water systems. So I think there can be some sort of sliding data standard, which would, empower these groups to do more modeling and to do more monitoring, to do more outreach and education, and really create an educated watershed of community members as well.
Talking about interoperable data streams that are really critical and has come up a lot. I think, so the last question that I think ties this together and maybe is something that we haven't directly confronted, but a participant noted that oftentimes the complexities are associated with long-term funding support, and that the O&M costs, operations and maintenance costs associated with some of these fantastic technology solutions can be a massive barrier. And they're seeing a lot of funding come through, but how much of that will sustain, I think, technology operations in the long term? And then what happens when a resource-strapped community can't afford to maintain a digital infrastructure project or digital transformation in the long run? I don't know which one of y'all maybe wants to tackle that.
Let me give it a quick shot. I think that all of these technologies, all of these digital technologies are great. And as a technologist, of course, I can't help myself but geek about all the kind of things that we can do with it. That's just, you know, the engineering geek in myself that gets me to do that. But not a single utility should embark in adopting a technology that is not going to produce a outcome, whether that is environmental or that is a economic or that is a social benefit that they can get a return on. So one thing that I have seen is in many cases, a barrier for utilities to move forward is more trying to understand what is that return on investment that they will be able to get, right? And so I would encourage any utility to look at these technologies as a tool that can help them achieve their objective, and truly look at what is the problem that they have, what is the outcomes that they expect, and try to do an analysis that will justify the implementation of this technology. So if a utility is unable to justify a technology in one of those three, or a combination thereof, three categories, then we definitely have a problem, right?
Yeah.
So the just one, I totally agree with Luis's point. One of the things that, and the industry needs to figure out a better way to market and sell the product it provides, because we've had, I believe, no one on this panel, on this call, doubts that we don't value water correctly. Put it in a bottle, slap a label on it, and it's about 300x the price immediately. And we're ending up having to give people in these communities where we didn't spend the money to upgrade the infrastructure or do the right thing in some cases, where to address the problems that have occurred, we're now having to give them this expensive water that we claimed we couldn't afford to give them in the first place. So I always struggle with the question about, can we find the money to support any projects for beyond just the deployment of the project? If we deploy, we value water adequately, and get the community involved, it comes up again to a point where they also recognize, you know what, this might cost a little bit more, but I'm paying for the service that the utility is providing. Things will move forward, I believe, especially when we separate drinking water, and we're paying for drinking water at a certain rate. Water for flushing, we don't pay a premium on that, because it's, you know, there are ways we can. But again, it goes back to fundamentally just rethinking a lot of things about the water system. So I'll hush now, but I truly think that the money is available to provide people clean water for a long time if we just valued it adequately. Yeah.
Tim, I think I'll pass it to you if you have thoughts on this question and maybe close us out.
Yeah, I'd love to respond to this question. And Luis, I'm especially thinking about South Bend, and you were dealing, or South Bend was dealing with the situation of a consent decree, right? And those have built into them sort of a natural alternatives analysis. Because what I was thinking with all the discussion we've had is if there really was a fair alternatives analysis that says, here's one approach, and here's another approach that uses technology, and moreover looks at lifetime costs, right? So the lifetime cost of software as a service and training and maintenance of that training for staff. If you brought all of those components into a side-by-side comparison of, two different approaches, an older approach and an approach that has a mix of things, including technology. I think what we need to be able to support is those approaches that have a lifetime cost savings. And there's lots of those opportunities. And maybe someday we'll be done with those, right? And we'll have done all the cost-effective stuff. It's not low-hanging fruit because people can't see it that way right now. But in another way to frame it, it is sort of low-hanging fruit. And then someday we'll just be around better product, better delivery that maybe is more expensive. That's a whole different point than the country's at right now. But there's an enormous number of technologies that, if you really put them fairly side by side, would absolutely be saving utilities millions, or, Luis, to use your example, hundreds of millions of dollars. Just a couple of policy ideas. I think it'd be fantastic if every state had a water technology ombudsman, right? Somebody in the office that, whatever state office deals with water, and their job is just to make sure that utilities have the support they need if they're interested in using technologies. They could tweak it and put a homegrown flavor on it. Businesses based in Tennessee or whatever state you're talking about, but just the use of those technologies, I think there's just too much of a barrier for utilities. The question that came up before around this stuff is complicated for us to learn. I'm not sure I want to learn something new, right? Like somebody who could help with that. Associated with the idea of an ombudsman is also, I think it'd be great if states and EPA just clarified when and how often technology is an eligible piece of something like a state revolving loan fund application or a rural assistance application. Those are fixable things, right? It's a policy clarification. EPA does those all the time. States could do those too. It could be a letter from the administrator, a letter from the state secretary that says, we're going to lean into this and we're going to make technology a big part of what we're doing. And then on the application process, for example, if you're in, and I apologize, I can't remember if it's Arkansas or Alabama, and you want to consolidate utilities, you want to do a physical consolidation, basically connect pipes and treatment structures across utilities, you get more points on your application. So, why not let utilities that do basically a fair assessment of technology and explain how it saves costs, why not give them 10 points on an application? There's a handful of ideas that are just sort of readily available that wouldn't be hard for anyone to put in place that would open more doors to the use of technology. And ultimately, what I think about, the example of large parts of the world, including many countries in Africa, sort of skipping landlines and going right to mobile phones, right? In the water space, how do we let facilities skip some particular stage, especially a costly stage of water infrastructure deployment, and go right to what the state of the art is? And we just need a more active. A more activist government, let me say it that way, because I'm a policy person, when it comes to helping facilitate those kinds of transitions or technology generation skipping approaches. So really appreciate all of your time today, the audience's time, and I just think we should, as a country, be talking about this much more often. I put in the chat box a mention of what is effectively a technology deployment program at the USDA side. We need more of those kinds of programs as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much.